Diversity and Inclusion in Health Psychology podcast. My name is Jolel, and I basically have done this a few times now, but I'm joined by a new guest and also a co-host. And I would like to introduce them to you now. Elise, over to you, my co-host.
Hi, so I'm Elise. I'm a research fellow at University College London, based in the Centre for Behaviour Change. But I know Jolel because we sit on the same EDI task force within the Division of Health Psychology in the British Psychological Society, and I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you, Elise. And now we're joined by two fabulous guests who are from Uncommon, an organisation that actually does some amazing work and is set out to do some amazing work. So I'm not going to tell you too much. I thought it'd be best for our guests to introduce themselves. So over to you, Kirsten and Sascha.
Hi, Jolel. It's really great to be here. So Uncommon is the world's first wellness platform for neurodivergent young people. We're starting with a focus on supporting university students. And I'm joined by my co-founder, Sascha. Sascha, over to you.
Thank you very much. So nice to be here. So Kirsten and I have been working on Uncommon as part of the Zinc Accelerator, which we can talk a bit more about in a bit. But Uncommon is all about empowering neurodivergent voices, particularly young. So as Kirsten said, we're starting with university, but we are looking at transitions into adulthood more generally. And what we are all about is finding the voice of neurodivergent people and celebrating what it means to be neurodivergent and supporting people where they need help. So that's what we're all about.
And probably most important to say, so I'm autistic, Sascha has ADHD, and we came together to found Uncommon because of our shared experiences, having a both exciting, but I'd say dynamic transition into adulthood, which we can talk about on the podcast, which absolutely would have been made easier by having the support that we needed at the time. So that sort of really kicked us into action with this. And yeah, we're looking forward to sharing more about that with you.
Thank you for joining for our podcast, because we are talking about equality, about diversity and inclusion in different settings. And health is, as you know, a broad topic that it's not just like in traditional settings such as hospitals, because people access healthcare or health in many forms, education, and also in employment, where we go to work, where we go to shop, where we live, where we communicate in communal spaces. So I think it's so important that we need to trying to understand how it all works for different people. And we were talking about communication just before the podcast started, and we were talking about body language, and I didn't know that of what you were saying between you two, this is how you communicate. But I don't want to say too much. I thought let you guys explain what you guys were trying to communicate there. So who wants to go first?
I'm happy to. So fundamentally, Kirsten and I, both being neurodivergent, communicate in different ways and respond and understand things in different ways. And we know that, so for example, one of the things that happens with ADHD, well, with me personally, and often with people who have ADHD, is that we can often really want to say a point and really want to get it across, and it'd be quite hard to work out when is an appropriate time to kind of interrupt somebody or to have the conversation, because quite often you can kind of just jump in, and it's quite hard to judge whether it's an appropriate moment to jump in or not. And sometimes that's just being enthusiastic, and sometimes it's, it makes life a bit difficult for people. So, and Kirsten, I don't know if you want to talk about from the autistic point of view in terms of some of the stuff we've talked about as well.
Yeah, and so autistic people often have similar challenges for slightly different reasons. So we often find it very hard to read body language, or it takes quite a lot of effort to read body language. So especially if we're communicating over long periods in meetings and things like that, we might start off making a lot of effort and really kind of trying to pay attention, trying to read the room, try and find that time, watch for those little inflections of body language where we can interject. but realistically, especially over time, being longer meetings over the course of the day, that becomes really, really tiring, having to make that really active effort. And so, you know, it's an unfortunate fact that for a lot of autistic people, they will either end up interjecting in the same way that Sascha's talking about, where you end up talking over people, and people can get offended. You know, we know of people who've effectively been counselled by senior staff members about that being a problem, or people withdraw and don't put their points across in conversations because they find it so hard to interject that they often can get to the point where they don't try. Both of which I think, you know, are suboptimal, really. So what Sascha and I do when we talk is we actively kind of help each other find those points in conversation. And the other thing that I often do is I won't be very aware if I'm talking for longer periods, a bit like now. So, so these are things that we talk about really openly between each other. And I think if you're open and clear about this not being a problem, but it's just something where we can kind of help each other out, then, you know, these are the sorts of things that you can do in workplaces really, really easily, in terms of facilitating people getting into conversations or helping people kind of frame those and the length of those. And these are things that people feel really welcome and accepted. And yeah, so if you see us in the middle of things, sort of sticking our hands up and kind of waving, it'd be because maybe we've been trying to interject or say something and we haven't found the right time. So
this is an example of me interjecting.
That's it.
So thank you. So this comes from some work that actually I was doing before I started on Common. So I would, when the pandemic hit and people were communicating online on Zoom, what was happening is that people were really struggling to read body language. And then when Kirsten and I came together, I understood more about what that meant being autistic. I realised that some of the techniques that I've been developing for people to help people communicate more clearly would be massively transferable to working with neurodivergent people as well. So when I was running Zoom conversations, we would have various hand signals when people wanted to express an emotion that meant that they could express it without necessarily interrupting the flow of the conversation. So you would kind of go like that if you were like agreeing with something, or if you weren't sure about something, you would go like that. And so we have a kind of pared down version of that with these conversations. So if one of us wants to say something, we just put our hand up, and it just means the other person is aware and can kind of finish, or can just say one more moment, I just want to finish my point, and come in. So it kind of, yeah, so we'll be doing that on this, as Kirsten says, on this conversation, and you guys are very welcome to join in as well if you'd like to do that. We can experiment with it live. Should I do it now?
Yeah, do.
Right, I just want to say, I think these conversations are amazing, and in fact, moving forward from now on, it's going to completely transform how I approach any meeting that I go into, because within my role academically, I have meetings with students, I have meetings with colleagues, and actually what we're learning in our team is, particularly neurodivergence, but other disabilities as well, people are really struggling to want to even come forward and say that they might have them, or that they need some support. So at least that's now going to really help me to put some measures in right at the forefront, that's just sort of general housekeeping for any meeting, and hopefully it will really make a difference. So just thank you, you're teaching me loads.
And it's only 5 minutes in. My God, what's it going to be?
Well, that's it, isn't it? And I think that absolutely, Elise, I think that's, for me, it's like I'm fascinated by what you just said, because you know, the value that you've provided in a short space of time is the point of the podcast, and hopefully the listeners are taking this in and making notes and sharing this with colleagues, because unless we talk to people like yourselves who can give their insights and perspectives, but also like lived experience, we won't know. And I think that's the reason why we wanted to have this conversation with you. So at least, like, you know, you're saying about meetings, like, have you ever come across people that felt like apologetic for who they are sometimes, like, you know, they've had to apologize for what they've got Have you ever come across the situation, at least, like, oh, I'm sorry I got this, or just to let you know, and you're like, hang on, like, you don't need to apologize. It's okay. That's just who you are. Have you ever come across those situations in your time?
I feel like it's almost a default that anyone in a position, so I should say I'm registered blind, so I'm not neurodivergent, but I do have a disability myself, and I think you just feel the need to sort of disclaim that you're going to be different from others in the meeting. So it's not something I necessarily see day to day, because I think a lot of people don't come forward when they have a disability or an accessibility need in meetings. But when you do see it, I think it is pretty standard practice for people to almost apologise. And if we work through that, that's kind of almost crazy, because nearly everything that someone would ask for accessibility, for whatever it is, to make transitions smoother, actually helps everyone, or usually helps everyone, and usually isn't really any additional work. It's just a slight shift in how you approach putting together a PowerPoint, putting together chairing a meeting, thinking about how we welcome students into a university course. So yeah, I mean, sadly, Jolel, I think I do see that behaviour quite a lot, and hopefully through podcasts like this, we can kind of start to raise the profile of all sorts of wonderful differences amongst us all, and how they're there, and things can be really positive from that.
Kirsten and Sascha, what do you? Thanks for that, Elise. And Kirsten and Sascha, what do you have you been in that position, or not yourselves, or other people have been in that position like that? I think that word default seems to be quite powerful here.
Yeah, I'm happy. Is that okay, Kat? Yeah. So I'm like, I think you're totally right, Elise, that there is this default position around apologising, and that's really like what we are trying to change, because we as humans are all different, and differences should be celebrated. If we were all the same, like, this would just be a very, very dull place. So the thing that I have seen it happen, and I've also, before I realised I was neurodivergent, I've felt apologetic for ways that I've behaved and so on, because I now understand so much more about how my brain works. I'm able to kind of put in systems around me to kind of power up my strengths and help me where things are trickier. But I've absolutely seen it in meetings, and I think the thing that Kirsten and I have developed really well, and actually not just with Kirsten and I, but with the wider team, because we have a team of people that work with us, is that if you are able to create a place of psychological safety where people are able to be transparent and open, and you just say, I am like this, and everyone goes, oh, and I am like this, and I am like this. It just creates that open dialogue where I can stand in a meeting and say, I'm really sorry, I lost concentration for a moment there. Would you mind just repeating it? And everyone's like, yeah, no problem. As opposed to where I've been in meetings before, where if I'd said that, I would have, it just absolutely would have been completely unacceptable. So one thing that we've done with our wider team is that we experimented with something called the Book of Me, which is actually based on an idea by someone that we know called Matthew Knight, who runs a big community of freelancers, who has something called the Manual of Me. And basically what the Book of Me does is it basically says, I am like this, this is how I like to work, this is what I love doing, these are the best ways to give me feedback, this is how to praise me, this is how to give me criticism, the times of day I like working are this. And it's evolving into a document where people just can be really open about it, and there's never any judgment. That's the thing, is that if someone says, I am this way, you're like, great, that's fine, you're like that, how can we help, or how can we bring out your strengths?
Absolutely. I mean, there is a sort of significantly broader issue as well with people apologising, and I think we all know about the positive and negative cycles of self-esteem. And unfortunately, this experience of feeling constantly like you need to apologise for aspects and traits of you that are just you is really quite detrimental. So I think it's something for everybody to watch. with their colleagues in the workplace, with patients, is where you see people feeling the need to constantly apologise, but often apologise again for something. It's something to note, because with the neurodivergent students that we work with, there can often in the first term be a huge and very rapid deterioration in mental health, because people are so used to not being able to do things, or being told that they can't do things, or that they're doing things wrong, that a combination of finding it difficult to adapt to new routines, maybe getting into poor sleep patterns because either you're trying to do everything because you're trying to keep up and try things socially and educationally, and then the cycles that can kind of get into between sort of poor sleep, maybe poor eating, and the beginnings of negative cycles of quite self-critical thinking, can mean that, speaking to universities, by week 5, often people have reached the point where they truly believe that they can't do something. And that's unfortunately a symptom of people having been told over very long periods of their life that they don't do things well. So this symptom of apologising for something is something to really watch for in your teammates and clients, because it normally behind that sits a whole kind of pattern of challenges that they've experienced. And I think it's something which you don't need to directly kind of pick up on, but if you can explore what's behind that and how you can basically help people understand and feel that whatever is behind that is okay, and that there are things that you can do so easily to help that person manage that, or just to let them know that actually it's fine, it's just a difference, it's not a problem, then you can gradually be part of that, creating the positive cycles of self-esteem that help people rebuild and help them enter professions. And I think, so for us, there are a huge number of neurodivergent clinicians, psychologists, psychiatrists, counsellors who feel they can't declare their neurodivergency because of the stigma that still surrounds this. So part of what we are doing within Uncommon is sort of beginning to train out a next generation of neurodivergent psychologists and counselling and wellness professionals who can train in an environment where that framework of positivity, that framework of strengths and of positivity and difference is around them, and they get to kind of bring that language with them and really kind of make that their own. Because if you can imagine, as a training psychologist, about, I would say, 98% of papers on autism or ADHD are about deficits. So if you're training and learning about this day after day, you have to read about deficits. It's not the greatest experience, but maybe you as an individual really want to be in this profession. So I think there are so many things that we can think about, both on a professional level and sort of as we work with clients, about this framework of positivity. It's not just about being positive and upbeat for the sake of it. It's about really kind of trying to change that message and the way in which we work.
It's really... Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. No, go for it, Sascha.
It's the thing that I've really learned working with all of the... I mean, we've researched with over 1,000 neurodivergent people, and the thing that I have really learned is it's like, not underestimate the impact of being told that you're bad at something for your whole life, that has on your ability to be able to go into a situation and kind of be open about it. Like people who are neurodivergent, like as Kirsten was saying, are apologising, but there's so much behind that, which is often what school has done. You know, friends, family, or you're like this, or why can't you be more like that, or stop being like that, why are you, and it's just years and years of being told that a fundamental part of your personality is just dislikable or annoying, or makes other people's lives difficult. And the crux of it all is that it's not that difficult to actually put stuff in place to make those potentially those issues solved. I mean, so for example, executive function is a problem, and executive function is, what that means is kind of around organising and day-to-day management of your life. Well, that's something, if you have ADHD, you can struggle with. Well, there are ways to solve that. And it's not, and they are practical and they are useful and they are great. But it's when you've been criticised your whole life as a neurodivergent person for being forgetful or for not being able to do certain things or whatever, it's really hard to kind of go, yes, I am. Yeah, okay, I am. And what am I going to do about it? But Kirsten was talking about, you know, what can be done in a work environment about it. But Kirsten was sort of saying that, you know, seeing things not as a problem. But I would probably slightly I would like the way that I would look at it is the thing that Kirsten and I think we do it really well. So I'm going to say it's Kirsten. I think we do this really well between ourselves. Is that if we get sort of stuck on things, or if we feel there's something that's not moving, we look at it as a problem to be solved, as opposed to something that is a criticism. So if we are saying to each other, I'm really stuck on this, like, great, that's okay, no problem. What can we do? Blah, blah, blah. How can we sort it? What can we put in? You know, it's that type of approach. So that when we get to those points, and when the wider team gets to those points as well, there's an environment where you can say, I'm just really struggling with it. And we go, fine, let's all get together, let's brainstorm, let's do it. This is the solution, we move it forward. It's okay to say that stuff. And like basically trying to see something as just something that needs to be sorted. Just need to sort it out. That has really, really worked. And practicing that means that the people within each other, visibly to each other, means that the people that are around us are also seeing that and also starting to feel comfortable about coming out and saying those types of things themselves.
I was just going to add to what you were saying, and to both you and Kirsten. I absolutely agree. I think there's this idea around that there's something wrong with people, they have to change. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with them. They don't have to change. That's just who they are. It's the environment that's been created that has basically excluded them and doesn't count them in. And that's the reason why they've had to make apologies and make up basically like differences, and they have to go the extra effort and all this stuff, thinking, hang on, if the environment was not there in the first place, then why are they doing all the work? Like, it's not, no wonder we're having all these problems. And we think to ourselves, like, and who should we be looking at? And this is why I think inclusion matters, and why we have to think as people in the field of like, look, you know, how do we make it accessible, make that people feel empowered? But how then we do that? Then we have to get the intelligence right. We have to go and talk to those people because they can tell us stuff, and not just do research, but also like to have these spaces like podcasts. Like, we need the intelligence, because we need to be better prepared, like our workforce, essentially. Elise, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you're right. I think there's a systemic issue, a kind of very top-down issue that's really difficult to break through, but we need to start chiseling away at it, just bit by bit. Small wins are huge wins, really, in this field. And I think it is the cultures, the practices, the environments that we just accept as normal that do kind of foster this kind of exclusion, and it fosters this need to kind of apologise and try and accommodate when we shouldn't be doing that. It should be so simple to change in a way, change our practices, because we're not asking for a lot of change in a way. It's very small tweaks to a system that can work. And that there was a really impressive piece of work carried out within my faculty, and a report's gone online, where we sort of interviewed staff and students about their experiences of being disabled on campus. And one of the really key messages was that the system and top-down pressure really prevented any kind of confidence to speak up about kind of differences, disability, and like Kirsten was saying, you know that then really can impact your self-esteem. It can impact your mood. It impacts your experience as a student. It impacts your experience as a staff member, and it just really shone this light that actually, whilst there is a really big issue that needs addressing, there are so many tiny things that we can do to chisel away and start to make these changes. And I think that's where something like Uncommon is really exciting to talk about, actually, because these are really amazing initiatives that exist that are making it easy for us to chisel away at these systemic issues, because they've been designed to help, to support and kind of bypass some of the really like difficult systems that you'd have to navigate to make some of these changes. So yeah, I don't know what else I need to say. I'm rambling now.
I think like I totally agree with everything you're saying there, and I think it is systemic. And I think the reason that, you know, there have been amazing NGOs and charities that have done great work in this space, but the reason that Kirsten and I have set this up as a commercial business, or an impact business, because an impact accelerator, is because we understand that the impact that we want to change, we want that to be global. Like, we are absolutely unapologetically ambitious about the change that we want to make, and that's why our platform's digital. And the reason that we are working with universities, because we understand that systemic change is, you know, there is systemic change that needs to happen, but actually the stuff that we can create, the platform that we can create, the interventions that we can create are not difficult. They don't require, as you're saying, a load of extra work. They are just there supporting the systems that are already there. And the crucial thing that Kirsten was talking about in terms of that, you know, the peer-to-peer and the kind of bringing in, you know, training a new generation, that is absolutely fundamental, because we know from the feedback and the people that are using Uncommon at the moment, is the biggest thing that's come up, the biggest benefit they're getting from it is talking to other people who are neurodivergent, like being in a neurodivergent community, because they're like, I'm not alone, this isn't just me, there's not something weird with me, there are many other people that are experiencing it. And so we know that sort of that isolation that is created by that systemic, you know, that stuff that's really difficult, like, we can quite easily break that down. And once people know that they're not different, then they're great. And autistic brains and ADHD brains are amazing when they're unleashed. Amazing. Kirsten.
Yeah. So I think, one of the things that a couple of things that struck us as we were designing Uncommon. So I had a kind of pre-diagnostic session about 20 years ago with one of the few specialists in the UK who specialised in the female phenotype of autism at the time, and didn't go through with a diagnosis because at the time autism wasn't a protected characteristic, which effectively meant you could be fired if your employer found out and deemed you to therefore not be fit within what they wanted. And also I had this pre-diagnostic and was basically told there was no support available, and what I wanted was help. And then I, so nearly 20 years later, thought, actually, I'm going to go for diagnosis. Again, asked what support there was, and the only thing that seemed to be available at the time was one-to-one CBT. When if you engage around social media and also read a variety of papers looking at this in abstract, you'll see there are actually distinct challenges with CBT. A lot of people in the autistic community talk about the fact that actually CBT has often made them worse, not better, because at the moment the system requires every single therapist to adapt the therapy to the client in a way that they can. And to be frank, there aren't enough people with the kind of expertise to do that effectively. There definitely are people that can, but to rely on an individual therapist to adapt each therapy in order to meet the very, very specialist needs of a client just seemed to me to be madness, that we were still, this was where we were at this point in time. And, somewhere between 15 and 20% of our population that are neurodivergent, and the very fact that we don't have anything specialist when fundamentally our brains work very differently is really tricky. So if you take the example of, say, sleep challenges, it's very common for autistic people to have different levels of melatonin. This causes problems both in sleep onset and then also intermittent sleep patterns. Now, if you take a kind of CBT approach to sleep that sort of says, well, if you do these things, then your sleep will improve, it's really, it's a really hard thing as an autistic person to be told, if you do this, it will get better, when actually physiologically there are reasons why it may not do. And so you're trying to reach this goal and you're trying these things, and when they don't work, that's it. That's sort of your chance gone. And so with Uncommon, what we offer is both peer support, but also expert-led support from psychologists and psychiatrists, educational specialists, coaches who are all neurodivergent, who have spent 5, 10, 15 years of their career reflecting on their experiences, of their clients, and adapting therapies to them. And then we take their learnings and build it out into ways of working with our users that mean that they get all the kind of value and the knowledge, both of that length of expertise, and then we combine it by crowdsourcing insights from all of our users and the techniques that they've used to help manage things. And we can only do that if we do that kind of en masse and at scale, and then it means that the support that we give people is truly adapted, and it's adapted in a way that is tried and it's tested, and there's a certain level of sort of consistency that we can apply to that, which is, what is hopefully kind of makes it so exciting. And I think it just means that we can, as we build out the support that we can have, we can gradually, one by one, kind of go through a series of challenges that people face and look at how practically we can best support that for neurodivergent people, and then have that support on offer for every single person that then comes on the platform, because we're not constrained by the individual kind of one-to-one therapist relationship.
It's hard not to be sort of like moved when you're talking about experiences. The levels of discrimination, the levels of exclusion, micro exclusions. That's why this is why I've been kind of like got involved with people like Elise in this area, because we know that people are being treated this way and our health system is excluding people, and we're thinking, hang on, this can't be right. That's why we need diversity in our approach. But how do you do it? We need to have representation, because we are challenging equality there. We are not equals just yet, and that's according to stats and data, let alone talking to the people. And I think, like, just by learning about what you've just said about CBT, there's similar parallels to be made in the places that I work with the charity that I run. Talking therapies won't work with the group that I support. But like you said, is that it then? Is that the end of the line? What else? No, there isn't nothing else. You guys are not important, because that's what it's saying, indirectly. So then we have to go and find out, or we have to come up with another solution somewhere else to help those people. And so where's the resources? Like, actually, we're all paying tax into a system to help us, and that's what it should be. Health is the number one thing that we need, and education. So I get that side, and I think one of the things that I took away from that is, like, I realized that when you look at other groups where they're going through difficult, similar, like I said, discrimination, that's the way I frame it. I'm still trying to understand it. I'm still trying to have empathy. But just for the listeners, I just wanted to ask this question to you. How would you describe, you use the word quite a bit about neurodiverse, neurodivergent. How would you best describe it to someone? What is neurodiverse, or what is neurodivergent?
Sascha's, we've both been on a bit of I suppose, a personal journey with this one. So Sascha, you go for it.
Oh God, okay. So up to 20% of the population are neurodivergent, and there's quite a lot of conversation within the community about wording and what should be, what is kind of appropriate and what isn't, as happens with all sorts of different minorities. And so it's a kind of growing conversation within this community. So neurodiverse tends to mean like an individual can be neurodiverse, but neurodivergent is a group of people. So when you are neurodivergent, you are based. So neurodiverse actually refers to. Well, actually, Kirsten, you might need to like just correct me on this, but neurodiverse refers to every. Like, go on. Actually, no, go on, Kirsten. You do it. It's fine. Put your hand up. Take over.
Good. So neurodiversity basically refers to the diversity of neurotypes that we have within our population. So everyone's different, which is fabulous, as Sascha said. Otherwise, it would be incredibly boring. To be neurodivergent implies that there is a group of neurotypes that diverge from the norm. So the kind of autistic and ADHD communities, the neurodivergent community, is a group of people of particular neurotypes. So that's autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, Tourette's, tics. And actually, they're, depending on sort of which approach you take, there's then a broader set of neurotypes which are sometimes also included in this, which can include things like BPD, bipolar. Basically, it's sort of saying that there are a group of people who are distinct enough from a norm that they have very different experiences, they often think differently. There are slight differences between those two groups in the sense that there may be different routes and different mechanisms and pathways within each of these different neurotypes. But effectively, if you are one of these divergent, non-typical groups, then yeah, you can refer to yourself as being neurodivergent. It's an interesting one because I think during the pandemic, we went from it really only being maybe sort of individual campaigners here and there who might actually come out and declare themselves as being ADHD or autistic. Through the pandemic, what we saw is an absolute kind of explosion of especially Gen Z, but also of people in their 30s and 40s beginning to kind of come out, because there was a huge increase in diagnosis of parents as their children being diagnosed. And the growth in awareness on social media basically meant that this sort of spin effect began to happen, where people were seeing people talking openly for the first time about what the traits of these different neurodivergencies are, and thinking, wait a second, that's me. And for the first time kind of going, oh, I feel this and I do that, and I've always been critiqued in this way, or I've always struggled with this or that, and maybe it's because of this. So diagnosis is really on the rise. That itself has been conceptually controversial because there is maybe a group of traditionalists who feel that it's unnecessary. I almost don't like to say it like that, but I think for the grand majority of the population, it's been just a hugely positive shift, because to be able to see other people like you on social media is just fabulous. And for ADHDers, so late diagnosed ADHDers in particular, many will have had really, really squiggly career paths. So many will have maybe sort of done really well at school, but then sometimes just really like fallen off the wagon, or whatever the phrase is. It's a weird autistic thing, by the way, of not relating words directly to their meaning. So you switch out words, which is why our language sounds a bit odd at times. But yeah, so a lot of ADHDs have really, really kind of squiggly careers. And so for a lot of people, they suddenly looked at that and went, oh, that's why. And all of a sudden they had a kind of reason or this explanation for why their lives have been quite different from their friends, family members, peers, and colleagues. And so, yeah, I think this awareness has been so incredibly helpful. But now we need to get that shift from it being awareness of the minority being aware of the minority to the majority being aware of some of these things. And I think the next step after that, which is something we're definitely doing a lot of work on at Uncommon, is that there aren't necessarily well-known communicated mechanisms for helping people manage various neurodivergent traits. So it's hard for managers. I think we've got to stick our hands up as well and kind of say, in order to help someone, you need to know what help to give. And at the moment, there isn't good information out there in terms of what these things are that you can do to help people know. So I think there is a lot of work to do around that. And so one of the things we do within Uncommon is when we work with people on our platform, we help them define what solutions work for them. And we also help them think through how they would like to communicate about that in a positive way, so that they can suggest to people around them, hey, I think differently, I do these things differently. Sometimes I'm going to find X or Y difficult, or sometimes you'll notice I do this or that. It'd be really great if you could blank. So yeah, there's a long way to go, but I think we're seeing this trend, this movement, which is great, and we've just got to kind of keep on going, I think, in taking that from an abstract through to kind of practical reality.
Thank you so much for that. Elise, how did you find that? You find that quite interesting, isn't it?
Oh yeah, no, really, really interesting actually, and it really resonates with me. I mean, I've certainly seen in my roles as kind of within EDI committees and things, neurodivergent is a word that suddenly, it felt like it was almost overnight. It just suddenly got banded around loads. Like it's always been there. It was always a term that was used, but suddenly it just appeared and it's almost like it was trending, like a hashtag on Twitter. And I think you're right, like particularly the pandemic, I think shone a really stark light on how people experience the world really differently, and everyone does. And actually for some of us, we need things in place to make sure that we can experience it in its best way, and really benefit from things that are going on. And I think from what you're sort of saying, Kirsten, there's just so many lessons that we can take away, certainly as practicing health psychologists who are working with clients or training students coming through, but also as researchers in terms of how we think about what research we might do in the remit of EDI, but as academics who are supporting students through their journeys, and working with other colleagues. And I mean, one of the key things that we do is communicate research with people. I think we really need to think about how we transform the way that we do this to be as inclusive as possible without putting people in positions where they sort of have to forcibly declare something to make sure that something's there and right. And I mean, this whole concept of communication, it's just like buzzing around in my head. I just think it's a really big one. So like I spoke earlier about the work that we did in our faculty to talk to students and staff, and how one of the really big issues was kind of this systemic problem. But actually what's really exciting and refreshing is that as an institution, we've made those recommendations and they're going to try and make change, which is amazing. But actually the communication needs to not stop there. So it's where we're sort of raising the awareness, amazing. We make recommendations, amazing. Hopefully we'd make changes, that would be amazing. And then we need to keep this communication going. What changes did we make? How did they work? What did they look like? And we can apply that sort of at a really big level, research and making all these massive changes, but actually in a really small level, on a one-to-one level, if you're working with a student, for example, who kind of talks to you and says, oh, I'm neurodivergent, this is what it means for me. And you can sort of keep reflecting back and checking in that things are working. And yeah, it's all buzzing around in my head, Kirsten and Sascha. You're telling me things that I think are really exciting and important for our community to hear. And I think that's where things like Uncommon are amazing as well, because they're doing all of it. They're raising awareness, they're taking on board what people's experiences are. They're making recommendations of what can help. They're looking at whether these are working. They're changing it. And I think it's just this whole really exciting model that could be applied in really small and really big ways in all sorts of different practices and approaches in people's work, in their professional lives, maybe even in their personal lives.
I mean, absolutely. I'm just going to add that in terms of like, I was working as a health psychologist in training. Part of the training, I did work in prison for a long time, and there were some prisoners. Some of the blokes had ADHD, but a lot of people didn't know what it was. Even even myself, who had some basic knowledge, didn't know what it really was. But I remember, like, I think that's where places like organizations like yourself, Uncommon, would be fascinating to work with people like us to tell us how to best work to improve health outcomes. And I think, like, one of the questions I wanted to ask, absolutely agree with Elise. Like, I think it's fantastic that you've set this up. But I wanted to ask, like, what motivated you to set this up? What was going through your head? Like, what kind of like inspired you? What motivated? What brought you together? I suppose. Like, I presume you didn't know each other like 10 years ago, but so I'm fascinated to know about what it is about. Why why'd you do it? Why did you set it up?
Sascha, do you want
to? Yeah. So we, I mentioned before that we're part of an accelerator from a company called Zinc. So Zinc is an organisation that builds, or effectively supports impact entrepreneurs. And what they mean by impact entrepreneurs is that that people who want to build a business where a commercial business where the sort of the profit and the purpose are equally aligned. So it's businesses that are going to do good in the world, but also want to run as commercial entities. So the way that Zinc works is quite unusual. Normally, when you go in for these types of accelerators, you go in with an idea and you say, sell widgets, or I want to do this, or I want to do that, and they assess your idea and look at whether it's got market potential and then accept you on. What the difference with Zinc is that they take you on as an individual. So you are not allowed to come with an existing idea or an existing business. So it's massively risky for both Zinc and for the entrepreneurs. So 70 of us joined this program. We all gave up our jobs. We all gave up what we were doing, and we come from this extraordinary range of different places, and we're all united under the one mission for this year, which Zinc's mission was for mental and emotional health for children and young people. So each year they have a different mission. So we all work together for 6 months, innovating, talking to each other, meeting each other, getting support, getting advice. We had coaching, we had a whole program, a sort of boot camp, and every week we would present to the whole group and we come up to talk about what ideas we had, and that's how Kirsten and I met. So we met at that program and talked about what we would like to do together, and then started to talk about what it meant, what our